All right, we're back. We are COMP308 in the winter 2019 semester, week 10, part 2 of our broadcast. We're going to be talking about intro to microservices. We've just finished watching a bit of a video from lynda.com in their Microservices Foundations course. I didn't go over the whole thing, but kind of went over some of the initial things. Let's take this link and copy it to our Slack channel, and then this way you have a chance to watch it. We all have access to lynda.com. So you can certainly take a look at this video. And again, I think as a additional information, I think it's a good source of information. It's not the newest video when it comes to microservices, and some of the stuff that the instructor talks about is around his experience with microservices and SOA and SOAP and so on, but it's a very, very good video. So we're talking about microservices, and we're going to start talking about this stuff. There's some ways of doing microservices with some help with Node.js, and there's a couple of frameworks we can use, Seneca and Hydra. It also talks about using Express for microservices, which we can. It just is a little bit more complex, and we'll talk about that. But really what it is the idea of a monolith is the idea that, that you have a client and server side with a database, which is what we have today, and it's very closely coupled. And when you want to, it's kind of scale the monolith, so you want to have more people accessing the same thing. A lot of times what we do is we create multiple instances of the same thing, even if only one part of the monolith it requires scaling, right? Whereas, and again, one thing to note is that it's deployed as a single unit. It's very tightly coupled, and different components of the monolith can't work alone typically. Whereas a microservice, what it can do is it's kind of developed as a single application, but with a suite of smaller services running in their own process. As an example, they're all independently deployable. They're standalone, as an example. And good examples of some providers that do that are Netflix, Amazon, Spotify. They use microservices. In this case, instead of replicating the entire monolith, only the services that are really busy get kind of redeployed and scaled up, and replicated across the network. One thing about microservices architecture is that each user interface object communicates with, could communicate or be coupled with a bunch of other services, and this can be rather messy, right? Because if you sit there and say, okay, well, I've got a UI, it's the catalog service, and it connects to the review service and whatever, and each service connects to every other service, you have this decentralized, decoupled set of services, and sometimes, most often, it creates a lot of network traffic. So probably a better way of doing things would be to use some kind of proxy. Here's an example of a single SOA component, as an example, versus this idea of a microservice. So a single component can be decomposed into several different pieces. And because microservices are so flexible, you can use different languages across different pieces, different languages and technologies. For example, on the front end, you can use kind of Java. You can use the back end, kind of user management with Django Python, right? And then you can use other kind of systems, with a whole other language altogether. In this case, the mailing system would be with Node.js. Okay, so you can do that with microservices, and you couldn't do that really with the other older SOA and SOAP kind of architectures. So basically you have this single responsibility principle, which is that each microservice delivers only a single business kind of capacity or business kind of behavior. That's all they do. And each business unit, has their own endpoint that you can connect to. A series of smart endpoints is what they kind of talk about, right? So again, one thing to notice, it's autonomous. It doesn't live alongside any other service. When you make a microservice, it only depends on itself, right? At the same time, they're loosely coupled, right? Loosely coupled means that they're there, but if you want to consume something from one service, you don't necessarily have to connect with another service, right? A lot of times. Again, one of the challenges we have when it comes to connecting with the microservices is this idea. This is the challenge. And this is maybe a con, right? So a lot of times what they use is this idea of a communication pipe or a gateway, right? So the gateway is almost like a proxy API that you connect to. So your desktop client and your mobile client connect to the same API gateway, and the API gateway itself is the thing that creates almost like a communication queue, and it in itself communicates with the rest of the services, almost like a middleman. That's what it does. And the reason for this is because of performance, so latency and all that, right? So again, I want to connect, kind of authenticate, right? But I'm competing with everybody else who's using the authentication service that may or may not be part of my application. So my application might share the same authentication service as your application, right? Because it's a microservice, right? And that means the authentication service might be really, really busy, right? And a lot of times what happens is I'm waiting in line or queuing up to access this. There might be a little bit of delay, right? And that a lot of times becomes a problem. So we have this idea of these queues, and some popular ones are, Rabbit, MQ, Kafka, and this other one called Mqtt. I'm going to go back and show you that one. Mqtt, if I'm not wrong. Mqtt, which is this messaging protocol, so machine to machine, and it's usually used for Internet of Things, connectivity protocol, but a lot of times it's like this queuing that happens from one microservice to another. It kind of comes in the middle as a middleman and allows us to use a service to connect with all these other services. The idea that everything is decentralized is a good one because they're not centralized, but at the same time, when you decentralize, a lot of times what happens is you have now, from a con perspective, many more things to maintenance. Like you have your instead of having your application all in one place, now I have multiple places to look to see if there's multiple points of failure as opposed to just one point of failure. So again, like I guess the gentleman said in the Linux.com video, there isn't these aren't a magic bullet or a silver bullet is what he called it to fix a problem. What this does is it presents new solutions. That's all it is. So I want to be able to scale up, as an example. I want them small pieces that I can give to different teams. Let's say, for example, I might have several teams across the enterprise, and I want to give, one team authentication and security, another team I want to give this access to, let's say, a contact list or a database, and the third team I want to do the front end, upper tier, top level links and the way the application runs. I can do that with microservices, right? It's much more difficult to do that, and let's say with traditional web app development. Okay, so that's what microservices allow us to do. Again, he talked about these same things: resiliency, recovering from errors, because my whole application is not down. There might be one component that's down, and we can just reset that component. Scalability, which we talked about at length. Replaceability, this is interesting. So I might have a front end that's Angular today, but tomorrow I want to be able to use React. So I can just swap out that front end and my back end remains. There's no difference. Now we can still do that today. Like, think about this. Right now we have our back end is Express and we have some APIs, and our front end, which is sitting right inside of our application, is Angular. But it doesn't mean that we couldn't replace that whole front end with React. And we have the same exact look and feel as Angular. It's not, kind of a difficult thing to do at all. So that's the replaceability idea is really awesome, right? I'm going to move on from this part. Again, I'm not going to read all of it. The independence, we talked about being independent, how they, kind of generate, easy to deploy. I mean, they're as easy to deploy as any Express app. But one advantage that they have, a lot of times they're coupled with something, kind of a containerized system called Docker, right? I'm not sure if you guys have heard about Docker. I put a couple of links up online for you guys to take a look at as well for Docker. But really, at the end of the day, and I'm just going to bring up Docker for a second. If I look and see what Docker is, right, so here's Docker. Docker allows us to almost create a micro environment for the microservice. I don't know if there's a better way of saying that. It's like we only replicate parts of our application and our operating system that are required by the microservice, right? So it's kind of a weird, different way of thinking. The good thing about Docker is that it allows us to compartmentalize our microservice architecture. And for example, if I want to share a microservice with you, like let's say I want to give you my authentication service, I can literally package it up, Dockerize it, and then give it to you. And then you can like literally deploy it on your system, with your application. And it's just that simple. You can download a bunch of Dockerized kind of like solutions already. You go up online, go on Azure, and you look at Docker and download all kinds of solutions ready to go, kind of out of the box that other people kind of produce, which is kind of cool. So that's the really good thing about using microservices. They can be made or compartmentalized into smaller solutions, which is kind of a good thing. We'll talk about Docker in a bit. Bad things about it, like we talked about, network latency. He saw that the gentleman in the video shows a map of where there's a cost. There's almost like he called it a tax, almost, right? A distribution tax. When you have a distributed network, you have a lot of communication going on the lines, and it can cause latency and some parts of the service being out of sync with the other parts, right? Operational overhead for sure, because I have more servers, I have more systems, more things can break down. I need more people. There's a lot of resources allocated to kind of making this this whole infrastructure work properly. One of the things they talked about is Node.js is a good candidate for microservices because it's easy to learn but hard to master. And I agree with this. I think Dr. Ilya captured this perfectly. Because what he was talking about here is you can deploy something really quickly with Node, but understanding every part of Node, that's really challenging. So to be honest with you, even I don't understand every single part of Node. It's massive. It's really big, and even though they've compartmentalized it, I don't think I've used every single part, every single module that Node offers. It's just not possible, right? At the same time, it makes it easier for us to deploy certain things. So there's a couple of ways we can do it. We can use Express, like make an Express app, and I can make different Express apps on the back end with a RESTful API for each of the microservices that I want to offer. So we can do that right now. If I want to make an Express app for my authentication service and a separate Express app for my contact list and a separate Express app for regular routes, for my top level routes, I can do that. No one's going to stop me to do that kind of thing, right? The challenge doing it that way is that you have to do a lot of your message management on your own, right? Now, there are some other ways of doing it. You could use a microservice toolkit called Seneca. It's a little long in the tooth right now, a little bit old relative to what it provides us. And I've given you the links up on Slack already. So if I go to senecajs.org, Seneca provides a way of almost like a framework for managing and the communication, the integration of microservices. And then one of the books that we use from Pack Publishing that we've been talking about in this course uses Seneca for its main mode of communication between microservices. So you can create almost like these plugins, this idea of plugins that you can attach. And if you notice, Seneca also has, if I click on plugins, they have some core plugins that it comes with, web, the transfer plugin. There's different user authentication features, JSON REST API, and so on. Lots and lots of stuff that it has ahead of time that you can just download and use. For example, if I want to use the JSON REST API, I can look at this plugin as an example, and it might give me some information on how to use such a thing. Okay, but again, they're a little bit old. All right, so that's Seneca. There's also something called Hydra. So let's look at Hydra. So Hydra.js. So Hydra.js, it's interesting. The Hydra.js is more of a way of connecting and making. It's interesting. Hydra is like multi-headed kind of lizard or dragon. It comes from the Greek. I'm a Greek guy, so I have to say that all the time. Hydra, it's a Greek word, Hydra, right? Which it means, kind of like a beast from the sea, if you will, right? With multiple heads. And the old story about Hydra was that Hercules had to fight the Hydra. I don't know if you ever heard this. And every time he chopped the head off, 2 more heads came up, right? And that's the idea with Hydra. Hydra is interesting. The idea behind it is It's a good name because it helps scale microservices. And again, I put up a couple of links here about Hydra on Slack. So there's the one that we're talking about. There's an article on Medium that you can read, which talks about Hydra microservices and how that all works. If you actually click on the article, I think it's a good read. Kind of, talks about this, what it is and how to make it work and so on. And it gives some examples of its use, right? It talks about how to start making it work and so on. And it's a framework on how to make microservices work together well. Okay, that's Hydra. Not so much lightweight as, let's say, this other one that was also mentioned in the PowerPoint, which is called Micro. Again, not as, I would say, as popular. And then so Micro, Seneca, and Hydra are the main ones. And then, of course, you can just go with a raw Express kind of deployment. And the PowerPoints give you some examples about how they're used. Again, I'm not going to tell you that any one of these is superior over the others because all of these have been replaced in GraphQL, which is GraphQL, by the way, is a query language, right, to access JSON and so on. I'm not going to go into that. That's a whole new language to learn with GraphQL. It talks about how Hydra works with Hydra framework, which is interesting here, and Seneca, which is again this older one that we used to use, right? But by far the most popular one lately is something called Spring Boot, right? And Spring Boot has nothing to do with Node.js really at the end of the day, or with Hydra or Seneca. It has to do with Java. So it's actually a Java-based framework for microservices. So it's kind of an interesting thing. The reason why it's so popular is because it's got lots of support and it's using a Java as opposed to something like JavaScript. Okay, so that's where the strength of it is, right? So questions around, what microservices are. That's what this thing is all about. What they are, what's the difference between a microservice and a monolith, and why would we want to use them as opposed to using a monolithic application? Anyone have any questions? Again, really, really high level, like there's not really a lot of examples. And like, think about this now. If I was going to look at my architecture that I have here in my application, how do I componentize or compartmentalize what we have already, right? Well, if you look at it on the server side, we have a couple of routes, right? We have our index routes. And again, we've got a lot of this commented out right now. All we need is really, from an API perspective, the index route is really the authentication piece. Log in, register, log out. That could also be its own. We can just, instead of calling it index, we could literally call it auth, because that's what it is. It's like our auth route. The rest, for all the other stuff we used to have is gone, and it could be refactored out. My contact route is all around accessing the contact list, right? So again, we have almost like two different separations of concerns, right? And this is all just backend stuff. There are no views associated with this on the backend server, right? All the views are handled by Angular. So that's like a third thing we can do. We have Angular on one side, and we have another couple of components. And I can totally see us taking the authentication routes, the endpoints for those, making that its own service, like housing that somewhere on Heroku, and building out its own Angular front end. Like literally, you'd have little front ends that would survive on their own. So in other words, you wouldn't have the same stuff that we have in our client right now for our microservice. I wouldn't probably do it that way. I probably would do something like everything would be one. It'd be standalone. Remember, one of the principles of microservices are they're independent. So you kind of take your Angular front end, but just for your authentication. You do routing, but just for authentication, right? So when you access that route, when you actually go to your main app and you log in, it takes you to the service. The service logs you in, and when you're done, the service sends you back. That's what it does, right? So that's one way of handling it. I'm not saying it's the only way. And this is such a simple application. Using a framework might be overkill, all right? But one of the challenges here, again, is that you really can't package off this application so simply. I mean, sure, I can compartmentalize my authentication piece, and it has its own login, registration, and logout views. Those are all the things that I can have there. And I can do the same thing for my content, for my contact lists, where the contact list requires you to be authenticated. And the authentication piece points to this thing over here. They're coupled, but they're loosely coupled. If I want to swap out this authentication piece and make it so that you log in with OAuth, which is like using Facebook or GitHub or something else, I can do that. I can swap that piece out. As long as the endpoints are the same and the output is the same. It actually says, yes, he's authenticated. Tom, when he accesses my site, he's good. Doesn't matter how he authenticates. I don't care. I'm just getting the right responses back from this other component that I've swapped out, right? That's a really good thing. I can't do that here so easily with a monolith. I can't just sit there and go like, well, I'm going to continue working my website and my web app, and I'm going to add in authentication like OAuth, with a provider without taking the whole thing down. I have to take it down, test it, build it. The whole thing has to come down. Microservices, everything else can work. And maybe there's only one part of your website is secure. The rest of the website, there might be informational stuff, some other things you can do with it, right? But the other stuff stays up, even though you can't log in, right? As an example, because we're swapping out the login piece, the rest of the application is up. Okay, so that's kind of a difference between one service and another. And that's the difference. I mean, I can break this down, but basically at the end of the day, you would have multiple Express servers that would be running in the background. So questions about this now? Anybody else have questions? All right, so we're going to stop here, the video, but I want to take you back to lynda.com for a couple of other things I want to show you. I want to talk about Docker. They have a great kind of high-level view on what Docker is. You should know about why Docker and microservices work together so nicely. We should talk about that a little bit. I think it's important because they really cover it nicely, and they can do it in a succinct way so you get a high-level view of what that looks like, okay? Otherwise, that's all I want to talk about for microservices this week. I'm not going to do an example until next week, and also I want to give you a chance to work on your assignment too, right? So if I give you too much now, like another exercise or something like that, it's going to kill you. What I do want to talk about, though, before we go, is this the assignment. So there's a group assignment that you guys have been given. I'm going to post it later on today, but I'm going to modify it slightly, and I'm going to talk about why I'm going to do that. So again, I'm going to go to, sorry, just give me 1 second here. I'm dealing with almost like a brand new PC. So I've got to swim to the right places so that I can do what I have to do for you guys. Yeah, so if we go to the stuff that I was going to be talking about today, there is this project that Professor Ilya put together. This says it's due week 13, but I'm going to make yours due week 14 to account for some of the time we've lost with Angular. Well, in fact, I think it's time gained more than anything else, but that's just me. And then we'll do a, so it'll be due week 14, but you also do a bit of a presentation for this one. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to be designing, just like it says here, using new technologies with a REST API and Express, a front end with Angular or React. I'm going to also allow Vue. If you really want to use Vue.js, you can do that. That's another type of front end. Now it says use microservices, but to me, and I don't mean to be facetious, but I think it's really challenging to do that in this app that we're going to do. I will allow you to use microservices, and I'll give you a bonus for that. That's what I'll allow you to do. So if you use microservices, great, but I'm not going to force you to do it. Okay, so that way it'll give you an opportunity and incentivize you to do that. Next week, we're also going to probably start with machine learning because that's another module that we want to tackle this semester. We don't have a lot of time left, and we only have a few weeks left with machine learning, and it's really a challenge to understand how all of that works together and links in with what you're doing. So, I mean, use machine learning. Again, I'll probably make that an optional feature, and I'll probably show you how to integrate some of that stuff. One of the things I can think of that's really interesting with machine learning is natural language processing, where we can add in some kind of search criteria or something like that, and then you can get a response pretty quick based on a data set. So we'll talk about that starting next week. Okay. It talks about reading a thing. So this structure that it is for your project, I'm going to change it up a little bit, make it so it looks like mine. That's what's going to happen. But I wanted to show it to you. So groups of 3 to 4 students, that's going to stay. I'm going to say groups of 3 to 4. I'm not going to allow you to work on your own on this. All right. So if you're someone who's expecting to work on your own, on this project is just too big. Okay, like in terms of what it's going to be. Doesn't matter. One thing that I'm also going to ask you is, I mean, you can certainly deploy on Microsoft Azure or Amazon, but I recommend Heroku, and I'm going to say that again. Recommend Heroku because it's nice and easy to set up, and it supports microservices and machine learning and all that kind of stuff. So does Microsoft, so does Amazon Web Services, so does Google. There's a bunch of really cool stuff. I'm also going to look at the Google Cloud Platform, you know, for all that stuff as well. We'll talk about it. Okay, so project specifications. Professor Early, I want you to do user authentication, and I'm going to ask you to do one. I'm going to do that too. So we already talked about authentication at length, I think, over the last couple of weeks. So it would be kind of weird not to ask you to do it, especially since your assignment 2 has that built in, right? So that's kind of something that we're going to need you to do. Now he's talking about a specific scenario that there is a bit of a, you know, a use case where you're making an application for nurse practitioners to monitor patients during the first weeks of their release or recovery from the hospital. So that's the specific app he wants you to develop, right? What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to give you some app options. I'm going to say, here's some app options. All of them are going to need authentication, all the apps I'm going to recommend. But there's going to be a couple of additional app options that you can make with your team. And I'm going to give you some of those, okay? So they're not going to be many. I'm going to probably have like 3 different options, probably including this one, right? So if you wanted to do this one, where you have 2 different kinds of users with 2 roles. There's the nurse role and there's the patient role. Both user, nurse, and patient would have to log into the system, but now we're introducing another piece of authentication called role. So that means the user data that you would normally have, that I gave you, would be insufficient. You'd have to have one more piece of data in there in your user model. And then you can compare the role of the user to give you authorization to access different parts of the website. That's what it would be. Okay, so they allow you to get, the nurse really monitors like information. They can send daily motivational tips and videos and all that stuff to the patient. On the other side, the patient has access to send an emergency alert to the nurse. So some kind of message. That's interesting. And you got to think about how you do that on a website. Maybe some kind of pop-up that says, "Hey, I'm in trouble," right? Or a messaging service, like some kind of instant messaging service equivalent, right?
Is the message available to all nurses, or does it have to be sent to a specific nurse?
See, that's a good question, right? I mean, I would say that probably for this application, because remember, it's just a project, it's not real life, probably 1 nurse would be good enough. For all nurses, like a broadcast, like some kind of emergency, like it'd be like a banner that comes across. I mean, you could do that too, but I don't know if that would be required. Daily information, they can enter that. They can do a checklist of common symptoms to see if how they're feeling, if they're feeling sick. One thing it says is use microservices for application entities. So again, I would make this an option, and I would say application entities, meaning if I want to separate authentication from the main application from the, user interface. If you wanted to do that kind of thing, I would give you a bonus. MongoDB is definitely something you can use, but I would also support Firebase, which I think is a great option. And I'm going to take a look. Let's take us to Firebase for a second. Yeah, Firebase is a great option because even though it's owned and kind of created by Google, if I go to my Firebase console, and again, if you have a Google account, you can do this. I can make a brand new application. Let's make a brand new application here as an example, and let's just call this thing COMP308 in the W2019 semester, and it's lesson 10, right? So let's just do this. So it says we're good. And it says use the default settings for sharing Google Analytics for Firebase data. Share your analytics data with all Firebase features. Yeah, we don't need to do that. I definitely want to accept it says you need to do that in order for us to use it. Okay, I guess I will have to. If I don't do this, then I can't continue, right? So I guess that's the cost of using this. They collect data on how we're using the application. I'm fine with that. Let's just create project. And what they do is they create almost like a workspace for you guys to use. Great thing about Firebase is that it offers you a bunch of different things. Authentication, which is separate, database, if you want to store stuff, other kinds of storage, hosting, functions, machine learning, Like it has everything built in here, where you can use a lot of the stuff to solve common problems and doing a bunch of things here with machine learning. And there's tons and tons of learning and tutorials that are online to make this all work. So I think it's some really good stuff that you can do with Firebase, and it could be a replacement, just like we talked about, for MongoDB completely, right? You don't have to use Mongo at all. No MLab. Use Firebase for your backend. It's still an NoSQL database, and it's powered by Google. So imagine you can have Firebase in the backend, and the great thing about Firebase is that you can connect it to other devices. So there's an API, there's documentation for Firebase. So if I go to, for example, database, right? Database, and it has, I'm just going to show you if it has some database features. So you can do authentication, storage, but there's something I want to show you in terms of our documentation. Here, let's go to docs. So one of the good things about this is it's compatible with Android, iOS, as well as C++, Unity, and so on. This is really great. You can make different applications that all point to the same database, and it's nice and easy to do. And they've got really solid APIs to make all that work out for you. So if you want to make an Android app or an iOS app or whatever, it's pretty cool. If you're going to make it, make it work with Unity, as a database backend, you're totally cool. And if I click on any one of these, so for example, I don't know, I want to make it work with web, which is what we're doing. And if you look at it, they have the whole API getting started kind of stuff with code examples that kind of come right out of the box, right? Which is kind of cool. And you can say, well, what is it? It's for web, but maybe I want to make it for Node.js. They have probably some Node kind of examples here on how to make all that stuff work. And they also Firebase works really nice with Angular. So if you ever look up something called Angular Fire, I'm going to put this up. Angular Fire, right? So here's angularfirebase.com. And what you can do is you can build Angular with Firebase, kind of combined. Maybe this is not the right site. See if I can get just Angular Fire. Angular Fire is like one kind of application for Firebase. I think it's just called Angular Fire. Right, yeah. Now, it talks about how to do it here, and this is the old Firebase documentation, I can tell because of the way it's been laid out. But as an example, they have examples on how to make all this work on the back end, and there's also stuff to make this work with Angular with the new Firebase that they have right now. So, I mean, again, lots of really awesome stuff, and it starts for free. Like, there's nothing for you to pay. It's a free service that works on the back end with, Firebase and Angular. So it's another option. So again, going back to this, so yes, MongoDB is definitely the preferred way of doing it. You can use MLab, and MongoDB Atlas, like we talked about before. And then it says use Express for a REST API. Okay, so it says Angular 5 and up. You can also use the front end for React 16 or higher, or Vue.js. And I'd be fine with any of those, right? Again, I can't show you React. There's no time for that. And same thing with Vue. I can't show you Vue or React, but they're really good alternatives to Angular. Okay, and then he breaks down the marks in terms of the way he's doing it, and he says something like innovation, intelligent use of symptoms using machine learning. So again, we'd have to kind of talk about how to do this for your project, and hopefully we'll get to it. But I'm probably going to redo this project and post it. I'm going to try and do it later today. I'm not going to promise because there's a lot of work to be done to make this, to bring it up to what I wanted to do. And there'll be enough details in here for you to have some selection of what you want to put together. But again, it'll be you working with 2 or 3 other people at the minimum to try and get this out. Why? Because you have your assignment 2 that's due next week. And then next week is week 11. So you have like next week, the week after, and the week after, and then you're done. Like 11, 12, 13, 14. And you have 3 weeks to figure this out. And there's not a lot of time. Now, there's no exam in this course, but you're going to have a final presentation that every team is going to have to do, right? And I'm probably going to start when people are earlier on. We have 4 hours, and that may seem like a long time to do presentations, but actually, there's no time. Like if there's by the way, there's like 40 people in each section, So if there's, let's say, if by chance, this is best case scenario, best case, if everyone combined into groups of 4, that means there'd be at least a minimum of 20 presentations we'd have to do. 10 presentations for section A and 10 presentations for section B. And if all those presentations took 15 minutes, which is roughly how much it takes, 10 minutes for the presentation plus 5 minutes for some feedback, that's 2.5 hours, and that's best case scenario, right? Setup, there's not including setup and takedown when you have to come up here, do your thing, and does not include if you have groups of 3, right? That's why I'm saying we can't have anything less than groups of 3. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to make some groups up on eCentennial that I want you guys to self-sign, like kind of sign up with some of these groups. I'll give you access to create your own group names and all that kind of stuff as well. And you can start thinking about ideas. I will post some of the options. The reason why I'm giving you options is because I want to make it so that it is easy to consume. One of the options that I've always presented to students in the past is the idea of making a tournament site. So I look at tourneys, right? And like there's, you know, kind of making a, I want to see if there's one that's out there that does tournament site. They used to have a really good one, tournament. It's called Challenge, actually. Haha, I remembered it. Let's see if it's still there. Challenge. So challenge, right? Challenge, which is really kind of cool. So what it does is you can create almost like a tournament site. A lot of gamers like to do this because they like to kind of, you know, kind of promote a game where you have a bunch of brackets. These are these brackets. So I want to, this guy will fight this guy, and this guy is going to fight this guy, and this team is going to fight this team, or whatever. Then you have a winning team, and those teams fight the other teams. And how to make a site like this? You have to log in, sign up, sign in, all that stuff. Make a kind of a you know, website with thing. I'm going to give you the option to make something like this on your own, right? So that's one thing that you could do. The other one I also offer is this idea of a ticketing system, like a trouble management system or an incident management system. So I'm going to say incident, wow, management system. There we go. So you can have like an incident management system that's like online. I'm just trying to see if there's something that makes sense. Incident management software, system software, right? That you kind of make on your own, right? So let's say here's Zendesk. We'll look at Zendesk, what it does and how it looks. Let's see if there's some products we can look at. And where you kind of create a ticket, you have an option, you have some kind of issue, and let's say for some kind of service desk, it's a service desk software. So a user reports a problem. You, on the one hand, there's different users. There's an operator, person who takes the problem, different roles, and then a technician who fixes the problem, another role. And what happens is the user that takes the problem, they do a problem report. They say there's a leak in the roof in A315, right? It's leaking or whatever. The window's broken and we got to fix it. It's a problem, right? So you make an incident, you report an incident, and then it's all housed in the backend database. And then what happens is you can classify an incident. Is the incident, you know, is it severe? Is it low? Like, you know, it's not really urgent or whatever. You can classify its urgency and severity. And then once the incident is created, it goes on a list, right? And this list is almost like the, you know, kind of like a list of incidents, and they're usually done by urgency, priority, and when they came in, first come, first serve. Then you have a technician who looks at the list, and he sees all the incidents. And typically, most organizations have a response time. Like, for example, something like, you know, they have to respond within 4 hours. They have to fix it within X number of hours or whatever it's going to be, right? So the technician can move an incident from, you know, new to in progress, as an example, to resolved. I've fixed the problem, right? And then, you know, obviously you'd want to have the agent come in and call the customer, confirm everything is okay, you know, and then you can remove the incident from the log, right? The incident log. So you can do something like that too. I don't think Zendesk Suite does a really good job, but I remember BMC Remedy had an old style system that used to take care of, incident management for, let's see if they have something like that now. We can see. I just want to get some pictures and images of what it looks like without this just turning off whenever I kind of scroll. You can already tell this is bad. So mainframe, digital workplace. It's more like, let's look at all products. They used to have some really cool stuff. Here, service management is what I'm looking at. So again, you have some kind of dashboard that tells you how many incidents you have. You can take, okay, this is it. It's called BMC Helix now. And does they show you some images? I want to see some images here. So here's an example where you take a report, and it's quite complex. Now, I'm not expecting you guys to make something as crazy as this, where you have how many incidents you have, what's the health of the system, and so on. But incident management has been going on now for many, many years. And there's always new systems that are coming out that are web-based, that come out and so on, right? So that's something that you can have. Now, obviously, that is a much more difficult way of solution or project than a tournament project. Tournament incident management. Someone who really wants to push themselves. If they have if they really know what they're doing and want to push themselves to do something, I'll give you that option. I'll say I'll make it like easy, medium, hard. I'll say that the tourney is kind of like in the medium phase, and there'll be an easier one, an easier option as well, where it's probably going to be some kind of I'm just going to put it out there, maybe like a restaurant site, almost like a skip the dishes or one of those kind of sites that you can kind of like order from a restaurant or something like that, and it'll kind of bring food to your house, right? Something like that. So we'll figure it out. I'm going to give you some options. All of them will be doable. I'm going to cut down on the requirements. So like even the incident management thing is going to be a very simple ticket you're going to open. Like there's a problem. Like, it can't be so complex because, you're not going to make an incident management system for, made within the next 3 weeks. Like, it's not going to happen. No one can do that, right? At least not with any clarity. So I'm probably going to give you those and probably the nurse one as well, just in case you want to, kind of talk about solutions with other people in other sections. Like, what did you do, kind of thing. And then you can talk to them because all the other sections except for our section, our two sections are going to be doing the nurse one, the nurse practitioner with the client, right? So I'll give that one too, but I'll kind of scope it out a little bit different. All right, so that's what's going to happen for the project. You're going to have until the end of semester to do it. Okay.
So is that you're gonna make up some?
Yeah. So on eCentennial, what you can do is you can create groups. Yeah, I'd like you to be able to do that. So, what for your project? Hopefully. I don't recommend Visual Studio, that's for sure, right? But that's just my look. You know what? Everyone's got. What was that? Yeah, it's here. It's here. So if you go to groups, yeah, you can make a new category for groups. We'll call it project groups. Here, we'll just do it now for you guys. So here we go, project groups, right? And with project groups, what you can do is the number of groups, and I can say that number of groups, no auto enrollments. I'll make it so that you can auto enroll. So groups of a number of people, right? And I'll make it self-enrollment. Groups of number, self-enrollment. Maybe there's groups with capacity, number of enrollments. So we do that. So number of users, we'll say maximum 4, right? So we'll say number of groups. No restrictions. Yeah, I'll make you do it between sections. I don't care. Like, it doesn't matter if you're working with section 3 or 4. You can't just work with other people, though. You can't work with other sections with other professors, right? It has to be with people that are in our groups. In terms of number of groups, it would be nice if there was 20. I just don't see that ever happening, right? Because it's like, that'd be, so I'm going to make it so that worst case scenario, I'll say that minimum is 3 people for each group, and there's, let's say, 80 people. So how many is that? Worst case scenario.
80 divided
by 3.
By 3.
8 divided by 4 is easy, right?
26 groups, I think.
What do you say, 26 or 30?
27.
Let's make 30. I'll make 30 just for people that are, thing. So that's that. 30 groups, yeah, 30 groups. I'm telling you, it's crazy amounts, right? No restrictions.
What if somebody like say,
To be on by themselves? Yeah, no, it's not gonna be. I'll just delete that group. It's like, oh, what happened? I'll set up assignment folders. I don't have assignment folders yet, but I can set it up. I'll set up definitely discussion areas if you want to. Well, actually, we have Slack. Doesn't make any sense. Lockers, same thing. I don't have to do any of this stuff. Just groups. Oh, it doesn't. It totally works. It totally works. I've done it before. Yeah.
So it's visible to everyone?
Should be.
You said project is due last
Week
week.
14. Yeah. So that means it's due April 19th,
But Friday.
20th. Yeah.
But I heard Friday is no movement. So Friday class is canceled for us already. So
I work on Saturday.
Saturday is not canceled too, or no?
No. Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, and that's why it's Saturday. Yeah. Yeah.
Sunday also. Yeah.
Sunday's on. Yeah. All that stuff's on. So there's 30 groups. It's self-enroll. You guys should see it. Check out the groups right now and see if you see it. So again, the answer is for people who are watching this online, there's no groups of less than 3. If you're in a group of less than 3, and if you don't have a group, I'm just going to put you in a group. That's what's going to happen. Huh?
Are you recording?
Yeah. It's recorded. Right? So you're live on YouTube. That's right. That's how it goes, right? Yeah, so just please, if I can get you guys to connect, and then what I'll do is I'll put the details up online, and I'll make it a group project that you cannot connect to. Now, here's what I might also do. I'm just putting this out there to you guys. I might make it so that every week going forward, there's another deliverable to make sure that everyone finishes. Okay, so starting next week, I'll probably have something that you have to do for next week, or for next week at midnight, and so on. There might be some stuff to do. So instead of making this massive thing to produce, I'll get you guys to do something, like every single thing. Otherwise, it'll never be done. And I'll try and give you some time in class to get it done. It's going to be tough, right? But hopefully you can get most of the project done in class. That's what I'd like you to do. So on that, I'm probably going to break it down into, even though it's a group project, it might be broken down into several smaller assignments, but it's one big project, right? So, for example, the presentation assignment, the presentation part is going to be a separate project, but it's going to be a group project, group assignment, right? And so I'll break it down like that. So expect to see an area that says group or project, and it might be project part 1, project part 2, project part 3, project part 4. And there's like smaller little parts they have to do, and they're probably going to all be worth like 5 to 10%, because this thing is a pretty big value for your final, right? Because it takes place of your final, and then it's a bigger process. Anything that's left over. Because remember, the midterm test was 20, and then plus I've given you 2 other assignments worth 15 each. That's 30 plus 20, so that's 50%. So you're basically your project is worth 50% of your course. That's huge. 50, right? With everything, project, presentation, other parts, exercises, blah, blah, blah. Let's say 40 to 50% of the course is what the project is worth, right? And if you look at it, what was that? Yeah, don't worry. I know those are other things, right? But that's our bonus, right? As like a participation more than anything else, right? So, but your project itself is worth a lot, right? So, it's something to keep in mind that you can't pass without it. That's the way it works. If you don't pass your project, you don't pass the course. Even if you pass the rest of the parts, so you won't pass, right? It's required. Huh? Yeah, but if you really have 100%, 50, yeah, you won't pass. Chances are, right? So, anyway, so that's how it goes. Okay. So, any questions? Please forward my way. Again, this is not supposed to be too scary. I'm going to try and break it down, and I'm guaranteeing the final presentation is probably going to be worth like 15 or 20%. Because that'll be the culmination of everything. It'll include, presenting what you've got. It'll be a demo of your project. It'll be live on Heroku. Like, these are all things that are going to be required. All right. So
when we're presenting our project,
yeah.
Do you expect us to just present the functionality, how the website?
No, there'll be a presentation as probably a PowerPoint with some stuff.
What I'll ask is that do you want us to present like how we use GitHub's project from? No, I won't make you use GitHub. You can use GitHub. You can use Trello. You can use Jira. You can use whatever tool you want, even Microsoft Project if you want. But you need to use some kind of tool for sure. And what I might do throughout the presentation pieces, like in parts of your pieces, is say,
I want to see what you're doing next week. I want to see what you're doing next week. I want to see what each person is doing. What's the plan for each person? So be ready for that starting next week, guys. I will make a little announcement later on today about that, but it's a significant portion of your marks, so I wouldn't take it lightly, right? Okay. Again, don't sweat too much about working with other people. I think it's pretty good. I would like for groups to be bigger, to be honest. If groups are bigger than, if someone said, I want to make a group of 5, I'm like, yes. I would say yes. I want to make a group of 6, yes. I would say yes, as long as, no group of 8. That's a little bit crazy, but if someone said a group of 5 or 6, up to 6, I'd probably, you know what, I'll even change it right now. I would welcome that, and I'll tell you why. Because most good sprint teams are between 4 to 6 people, right? Groups that are smaller than 4, especially when it comes to this kind of stuff, this is my opinion again, it becomes very, very challenging to do. I wonder if I can do that here. Project groups. I don't know if I can do it. Nah. Edit category. Yeah, see, I can. Oh yeah, see, it doesn't allow me. There may not be a way of doing it. That's okay. Groups. No. Huh? I guess I could. Anyways, it's not a big deal, guys. We'll figure it out. I mean, at the end of the day, there's probably some other button you have to choose to do that without deleting everything. But again, what I want you guys to think about is don't worry about this stuff. This is just administration. The stuff that I feel like you guys should concentrate on is what do you feel doing. And if you have a really good idea too, maybe you're going to have a really great idea that you want to come up with me to and say, hey, listen, I got this fantastic idea. You know, Tom, can I do this? Whatever this happens to be, right? And then I would accept that too. If you said like, I want to make a, I'm into esports and I want to make an esports tracker, right? To track the kind of, the progress of different teams, that I'm looking at or whatever. I mean, there's like, I don't know, a million things you can think about that make sense. So I'm probably going to give you some basic criteria. These are the things that I'm looking for. Authentication is one of those pieces, right? An express backend, an express API, some kind of front end with, that's going to be, again, Angular, React, or Vue, right? That you're going to have to do. So one of those three front ends, right? And then I'm probably going to give you something like you have to have maybe different user roles, because that's what the nurse practitioner one is going to have. I would like as an option to include machine learning and microservices. I'm going to put them in there because we're going to be talking about those things. But I'm not going to make you. It's not going to be required, right? And then in your groups, I may ask you to say, tell me what your roles are. Like, is there a designer for your group? Is there someone who's more, better with, the presentation side? If everyone is a developer, what's everyone doing? Right? Like, I want to know, like, what are you people doing? If you're all developers, who's working on what is what I want to ask, right? I think we need a clear delineation here, right? Because it's a web app, and there's, let's say, 4 of you. Okay, so what have you all done, right? And there shouldn't be a case where one person is doing the work of 4 people. That doesn't make any sense. And the other people are just riding along. I won't tolerate that. I'm telling you right now. It's just not something that it would just kill me, right, if I saw that, right? Okay? Any questions around that? All right, so guys, I'll see you next week, and I will have a communication out about this group project later on today or sometime soon, okay? Thank you.